Exatas ou humanas? Cidade ou campo? Poder fazer escolhas significa conquistar um dos maiores desejos da humanidade, a independência. E o SEBRAE acredita que empreender é uma porta para a independência, que está aberta para as pessoas de todas as idades, gêneros e que buscam mais opções para suas vidas. Para o SEBRAE, tão importante quanto incentivar negócios a darem certo é apoiar pessoas que transformam sonhos em projetos de vida, que ajudam a gerar empregos, desenvolver a sua comunidade e a transmitir a cultura empreendedora no país. Um lugar onde todos têm liberdade para escolher, inclusive escolher empreender. SEBRAE, a força do empreendedor brasileiro.
A moda da Malve não tem ponto final, igual a sua. Nós acreditamos que pequenas atitudes transformam o mundo. Quer mais atitude do que mudar o seu jeito de escolher? Moda inteligente, feita de um jeito mais sustentável que reflete o seu estilo. Uma peça de roupa pode viver muitas histórias, por muito tempo. Não é sobre ser descartável. É sobre você e sobre o mundo. Malve, moda sem ponto final.
Hello, I'm Nina Braga, co-founder of Rio Ethical Fashion. Good afternoon, everyone, or good evening, depending where you are. Welcome to Rio Ethical Fashion. We are very happy to have you here with us. It's been an incredible journey till now, and there's a lot to come already. And now we are going to talk about dissolving the ego of fashion. And to do so, we are proud to have here and happy to have here with us Danielle Bruggeman, Professor, Cultural Theorist, and Professor at ArtEZ University from Netherlands. And also Lilyan Berlim, a Professor at IAD and ESPM, Autor, and Consultant at SEBRAE-RJ. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the invitation.
Hello, Lilyan.
Olá a todos e todas.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for this invitation and the opportunity of being here with Danielle. It's surprising. It's great.
Então,
So,
nós temos assistido
we watched several panels, discussions about companies, about circularity in fashion. And we have been watching lately for the last 10 years this very strong discussion about the insustainability of this system. And when I contacted Danielle's work, it was a grateful surprise because it seems there is an alignment among researchers in the world that there is a discussion that is crossing all the system, as this discussion belongs to all the panels, to all the discussions that we have had so far and the coming ones as well. The discussion seems to be a point that we are not converging, but we are crossing all the discussions. That is the system fashion. And when I contact Danielle, your work, I feel so pleased because I said, one more researcher that is aligned in this discussion. That discussion is a very focal point, a sensitive point for people who work with fashion. The fashion system that you have translated so well, this ecosystem of fashion, the ego of fashion. So dissolving the ego of fashion, I believe this is the foundation of the discussions of sustainability. I normally say that a ship is not going to turn over, to change the route, they need to curve. Its curve is very long. And we have all this discussion alongside this curve about a circular economy, reuse, about management, strategic management of sustainability, everything. But the route, the direction of change is transformation of system, the dissolving of this ego so we can really deal with a dimension that is more humane, so a dimension that is about nature. When we see the human dimension, we understand that we are from the earth. We have the same rights that the plants, the rivers, and the mountains do. Also in this context, as if we detox our identities of a system that is mercantile, a system that has mercantilized the looks, a system that is not material, fashion system, filled of codes, values, that somehow colorized the identities, the contemporary identities based on the desires, excluding the creative power and this energy that is so big that we have in fashion. So your work is really fundamental, and I feel so honored by this invitation of Yame to talk to you today. No one better than you to talk about your own work. So here I'm asking you now, introduce your work. The floor is yours. We are here to listen to you very carefully, so tenderly, and then we stop so we can have a discussion, a chat, and then we open up the moment for questions. 15 minutes. In the end, we open up Q&A. Feel free, my dear. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Lilyan, and thank you, Nina and Yame, for the invitation to be here. It really is an honor to be here together with you to present Dissolving the Ego of Fashion. And I'm really looking forward to our conversation, Lilyan, as well. Yes, I will indeed start by presenting the book. I will have a couple of slides, so I will start opening that right now. Can you see the first slide? Just to double check?
Sim.
Yes? Okay, wonderful. So this is the book cover of Dissolving the Ego of Fashion. But indeed, what I discuss in the book is how the current fashion system operates. And it continuously builds an enormous ego. It continuously feeds itself with the spectacle of the runway, with glamour, with star designers, with seduction, with money, with an abundance of visual images and an excess of consumer products. And I argue in the book that this often denies the human dimension, indeed the subjective dimension, and the actual lived experience of the human beings who actually wear and make the clothes. So there are so many crises, societal crises and challenges for which the fashion industry holds a responsibility. Yet it is generally tending to focus on itself as a narcissistic system, not really caring about these other issues going on. So it is a very self-sustaining system, but as we know, it is a very unsustainable system in an environmental, social, cultural, ethical, and material sense. And what I try to do in the book by highlighting three main themes is to argue that dissolving the ego of fashion will help to create alternative systems, will help to acknowledge our subjective human dimensions and values, and will help to re-engage, actively re-engage with the bodily and material dimensions of fashion. So there are three main themes that I want to briefly touch upon because they are key to the book and the focus of the book. The first main theme is about a systems level. And here in this chapter also, I highlight the importance of developing a critical fashion discourse. that also produces alternative approaches in an affirmative and ethical way. So this is about the intention to transform established ways of being, seeing, doing, and thinking. And this is also what we can see happening right now. There is a rising discourse of critical fashion practitioners who do not only criticize the current fashion system, the industry, but they really try to develop alternative approaches. And this is very important. And in their work, I have an example right here on the slide by Ruby Huet, who is a critical fashion practitioner. And she, for example, explores alternative understandings of what a collection is and what a collection could be. So just a quick example, but this is really about negotiating and criticizing the fashion industry as it operates now, but even more importantly, developing alternative approaches while doing so. So that's what's happening on a systemic level. And then the second main theme that I wanted to highlight indeed is the human dimension, fashion's human dimension. And this really starts from a critique on the mechanisms of systemic dehumanization, which are there in society, but very much there in the fashion industry. If you look at the dehumanized labor of workers in the factories, but not only the garment workers, also many fashion designers, also very close to where I live here in the Netherlands, for example, who cannot keep up with the high demands and the high pace of the fashion system, which is also an expression of this dehumanized pace. But also if you look at fashion images, if you look at the reduction of the complexity of identity to a visual image, it's all about appearance. It is all about the objectification of the body to be looked at. Is argue for the importance of doing more justice to all the blood, sweat, and tears of all the embodied subjects in these systems, in the fashion system, in the industry. And I mention embodied subjects because we are embodied subjects. We have an embodied existence. And it's important for me to highlight this precisely because so many bodies are reduced to an object. So many human beings and bodies are exploited as dehumanized and commodified instruments to produce fashion. So recognizing this human dimension is also a process of acknowledging the agency of all people involved, which is about recognizing their active role of engagement and their capacity to act. So this is for me a very important theme because there is an urgency to restore the subjective and embodied dimension of all human beings involved in the fashion system. And this is an image on the slide by the work of Pascal Godson, who is a colleague of mine. And in my view, her work very much represents that ethical engagement and the importance of that human dimension. She really starts from the question, what is serving our well-being? And then finally, the final theme that I wanted to address is the ways in which we engage with matter, materiality, and material resources. Because in the fashion system, there is an abundance of non-material meanings, concepts, and codes, but at the same time, the ego of fashion is also highly materialistic, excessively obsessed with material products to consume. So there's a paradox here. It is highly materialistic, and at the same time, material things urgently need more care. So this is something that we will also go into in our conversation, Lilyan, because matter and materiality is right now very often exploited as something worthless, as something valueless. It is exploited for commercial aims. So that's why I try to argue that matter deserves to matter more. We need to take better care for the material things that we engage with. and doing so in order to contribute to a more healthier ecosystem. Well, I guess we will go into that in our conversation as well. Maybe just to address the final slide and the image there. This is the work of Diana Schierer, who is a Dutch artist. She works with the root systems of plants to create patterns and networks. And I think this is a very interesting example because she really starts from the potential of the material and the materiality and the aesthetics of the material itself. So this is a very different way of working that I find interesting. Offering more attention and even better word maybe is care for bodies and materials that matter, and the relationship between bodies and the materials that we engage with, that affective relationship and emotional relationship with the material objects that we wear. So I just wanted to take you indeed through these three main themes that I address in the publication, Dissolving the Ego of Fashion. And I'm really looking forward, Lilyan, to starting the conversation with you about this. I'll stop to share my slides.
Que bom. Que bom.
That's great, so beautiful to see you presenting it. That's wonderful. Thank you for the presentation. Thank you so much. And I would like asking you, I'd like to start from a point that I read on your book, Dancing with the Ego, Fashion Ego. Dancing has brought me a poetic image, so outside the logistic of the market. In this world, we have a system of fashion that is so disconnected of our real world, internal world, a process that moves us away, our bodies and also our souls, our affections. When you brought this term dancing, it heeded my attention. I would like to hear from you about it. Dancing, dissolving the ego of fashion through dancing. What kind of dance is that? What kind of music is that?
Yes, that's a wonderful question, Lilyan. I'm so nice to hear how that resonated with you, and your interpretation of dancing with the system is beautiful, because it indeed brings it back to the body. It brings it back to the affective relationship that we can have with clothing, with each other. Because fashion, of course, also is about social interaction. It is about identity, expressing who we are, being there together, engaging with each other. That sensorial dimension is very important as well. The metaphor of dancing for me was important because very often we see when it is about the unsustainability of the system, we see a lot of resistance and protest and critique of the status quo, which is very important, of course, because, well, we need to understand the problematic facets of the system. But we cannot only remain in a state of resistance. We cannot only remain in a state of protest, of course. And for me, it's very important that we indeed gently and carefully start to create a movement. And that's why I really find the metaphor of dancing fitting here, because it is about that careful exploration about how can we do it differently. I feel that is more productive to really explore affirmative alternatives instead of only starting from a very hard resistance. and protest and remaining in that state. So that's for me what dancing also is about, moving together, creating movement in a gentle, careful way to try to explore how to do it differently together in an affirmative way. And indeed, like you said, it very much brings it back to that embodied dimension of fashion, to the physical, the social, the connection to the other, and also pleasure, joy, love, and playfulness. So thank you for highlighting that part of the book.
Sim. Resposta boa.
Good answer. We have a thinker person in Brazil, Ayrton Krenak. He's an indigenous person, and he mentions the cosmic dance. And I understand dance, the joy of dancing, creativity, and the energy of dancing as something that is trespassing, breaking some rules, very well established. That's why that heeded my attention when you talk about dancing. That's really, really interesting. There is another point, Danielle, that is the identities, the dimension, the ethical dimension of identities, subjectivities. And in this point, I try to speak in a very simple way. Your work, it's a very high intellectual level, very good level, and I try to bring this discussion in a simple level because I am a teacher. I'm used to simplifying everything. You mean about embodiment. Embodiment. You take to yourself the senses, your body, the dimension, the emotional and affectional dimension that we have with everything, especially objects, material objects, clothing. I think this is a point really important in your work. And this dimension of identity, this dimension of connection, this embodiment of ourselves is really present in your work. And then you mention subjectivity, identitary ethic. Talk about it, please, a little bit more. It's not a question. Everything that I ask you is not really a question. It's tell me more, tell me more.
Yes, again, yes, true. Embodiment is very important in order to really be able to ethically engage with fashion in a different way. And for me, this has to do with the ways in which bodies and human beings are exploited in the system right now often. So I just gave the example, for instance, of how bodies are often there to be looked at in fashion images, for instance. So then it is merely about looking at the body as a visual object. And it's not so much about what it is to live through one's body. And that is what I really want to highlight. What is it like to live through the body? How do we experience the world through the body? How do we make sense of the world through the body? Indeed, through an embodied experience, through a sensorial experience. And this is not only indeed looking at the body, but it is taking into account our subjective dimension of who we are as human beings. So this is really trying to do justice to who we are in our embodied selves as human subjects, and not reducing who we are to objects to be looked at, or not reducing who we are as instruments of production. So I think that realization of being embodied subjects, every living beings, you can also look at animals. Yes? It's not only about humans, it's also about animals, for instance, as living beings, looking at how they are exploited and used in the fashion system, in the industry.
Yeah.
So we really experience our own subjective identity through our embodied existence. And realizing that this is, of course, the case for all wearers, all makers engaged in the fashion industry, in the fashion system, to me is really an important ethical point. If we really want to engage with fashion differently, if we really want to engage in a more ethical way, we need to start with that realization of being an embodied human being, looking at each other as embodied human subjects instead of the maker of our clothes as instruments of production or being objectified in fashion images. So this is for me indeed an important point when it comes to engaging with each other differently, doing justice to who we are.
Sim, fazendo justiça a quem
Yes,
somos.
making justice to who we are in all our diversity, in all our, that is a component of culture that somehow was almost invisible in fashion, because fashion has a system, a cultural system. It seems that is heterogeneous, but in fact there are dictatorship on how these bodies are superficial, so we can project an idea that is built in a market. And this matter takes me back to Bauman when he says that as the identity of this consumer is built up through purchasing products in a big supermarket of identities. So your statement will break it, saying, no, we have subjectivity, we have our own subjectivity, let's develop it in the territory, in our environment. And it's interesting, Danielle, because we live in different continents, and we have a reality here in Brazil that is so different. We are a producing countries. We have lots of sweatshops down here. Things are not happening in Bangladesh. Things are happening right here. So when we realize our own identity, maybe it's easier to understand the human dimension of our existence. And clothing, these objects that are so close to us, so important. That is another aspect that is also interesting in this perception of the identity, of bringing your own identity in. Carl Jung term, when he talks about individualization. It's not individualism, not even individuation, as if we were maturing as a society, and now we are in a process of taking our own identity, our own responsibility on our own identity. This point in your book is one very touching point for me, very, very important. So many questions, so many topics coming out of it. I've always had, to me, ethics and aesthetic. Nina and I, our friend here, Nina has always talked about ethic and aesthetic, Ray Fleischer, ethic and aesthetic. I talk about ethic and aesthetics. And the fashion has so much aesthetic points, and we need to develop new aesthetics totally connected with this ethics idea. But for that, we need to dissolve this ego, this fashion ego, and the ego of fashion that we have internalized in a wrong way. So when we change this route, maybe this would be the big map. If there is a roadmap, we have to reach a point so all the practice go right. Otherwise, we keep on bringing lots of sustainable things, fostering a hyper-circular economy for a hyper-consumerism, and keeping all the companies doing more and more, producing more and more products inside the mindset of the ego of fashion. That's why that your argument is fundamental here in bioethical fashion. This comment is really, really important. Well, going to another side, changing gears. I love this image that you brought us, the final slide. I know her work as well. And I really liked, I am a person connected to nature and trees in general, and the rains. And then you bring this idea of rhizome, trees, and hierarchies. I think that this vision is so interesting. And one more time, tell me about it.
Thank you, Lilyan. And I completely agree with what you just mentioned about the homogenization of the system, and indeed that supermarket of identities that we continuously internalize. And that's also why it is so important to indeed move beyond the ego in order to care more for others, moving beyond our egoistic focus on ourselves. So we really need to take more care of others. So it's beautiful that you highlighted that point as well. And then moving to the rhizomes, yes, it is true. That was an example of the final image I showed. In my work, I draw upon the rhizome in different ways, actually. Some designers work from new kinds of bio-based approaches. They really start from the potential of the material, which is a very kind of new way of working, because many design educations start from the visual concept first. So that is privileged. And then secondly, it is, there's a search for which kind of material suits the visual concept. That's a very different way of working than what it means to really grow materials and see how they grow. That's a very different approach. But what I also do in my work is I use the philosophical concept of a rhizome, which comes from the Deleuzian philosophy of Deleuze and Guattari. And in their philosophy, the trees and the rhizomes play a very important role. And they stand for different kinds of systems. And I feel that way of thinking is very important also for the challenges that we are facing in the fashion system. They see a tree as a hierarchical system with one root. It's also vertical. So there is a hierarchy. And they use the example of the rhizomes, which is the root of a mushroom, and it can grow in many different directions. So there are no beginnings, there are no ends. It's only about the middle. It's always about the in-between position. So there's no hierarchy. There are just continuous points of connection. It's a very different way of systems thinking. And I really find that way of thinking so important. In their philosophy, they start from the idea that rhizomes can start from anywhere. And I see these critical fashion practices who develop alternative approaches, who try to develop alternative systems as a rhizomatic way of working. So this can start within the system. It can start in a hierarchical tree. There are maybe just some minor openings. It's about creating an opening. A rhizome is an open system. It can grow endlessly. It is not a closed system. So there are many elements of this notion of the rhizome that I feel that we can learn from for fashion and for transitioning into another kind of system. And in general, I feel that we can learn so much from ecology, from ecological principles, from ecosystems in nature. especially also in relation to moving towards a more circular system. And for so long, we have indeed had that hierarchical relationship of the human beings enacting power over nature, exploiting nature and the natural matter for human purposes. And this is something that really needs to become a more balanced relationship. We need to understand that we are indeed, and I think you started with that in your introduction, we are as human beings embedded in nature. We do not stand above nature, but we pretend to do so. If you look at how we operate, how we engage with material resources, how we engage with matter, how we exploit that, how it becomes a piece of clothing that we simply throw away. So restoring that relationship to nature, to natural systems, to living systems in nature is very important. So learning from ecosystems, learning from ecology in order to move towards that alternative fashion system, I think is very important. And there's still a lot of work that we can do in that field, I think.
This idea of rhizome is an idea that challenges the power relationship totally, and restore as well a hierarchy in the sense that there are, for example, food chains, there is a certain vertical X, but there is no power relationship there. And this purpose, it seems that we are talking about, I'm sorry, I'm just opening up a parenthesis. It seems that we are having archaeology for the future, that we are talking about things that are in the future, you see? Let's break the power relationship. Let's work like a rhizome in all the areas. How can we start everywhere? It's beautiful in your book because you work with critical design, but you have an affirmative work and pointing the alternatives, and do not point the alternative as a practice. You talk about deep dimension. There are alternatives. Yes, there are. And they have endless source of creativity and energy, as if it indeed you have brought a work that it seems that came from the future to us, you see? You have it, a piece of the future to you. Let's go this pathway. So, I talk too much. I used to talk too much.
No, this is an important addition. Thank you so much. Of course, what I write is inspired by the practices that I see. And I see indeed that there are so many fashion practitioners who try to imagine what the future could be. And they try to bring the future to the now and try to make it tangible, to experience it sensorially, because it's also about practicing other kinds of futures, of course. And I feel that is very important. Even though we are not there yet, we are in a phase of transitioning. It's so important to explore that and to practice these other ways of being, thinking, and doing with fashion. And this is also, like I said, what I write is very much inspired by all the practices that I already see right now. We're already doing that, yeah. Even though on a small scale, but it's important to learn from that.
Yes, Danielle, I have my final consideration. Unfortunately, we do not have more time. You know Kate Fletcher. And once, having tea with her, she commented, and we talked about it for a while. We are not materialist enough. We should be more materialist. We should be more connected to the matter. We should take better care to be more connected with them because all the materials are alive. And then there is another dimension of what is to be like, to be living outside the mindset of what is alive, what's moving. The rocks are alive. Clothing produced on fibers, plants, they are alive. And then in your work, in part 3, you bring a vision about materiality, immateriality, and new materialities. And it seems to me two contexts. One, where there is this return, this rescue of value of matter itself. And there is this comment, we are not materialist enough. And there is another context of new materialities. They are not pollutant, they are alive, truly alive. They are starting up, they are coming up now. So talk about this third and wonderful part of your work, because there is this context of materiality present, especially in the brands, fashion brands. And the sustainability aspect is connected and related to materiality. That's a big mistake as far as I think there is misunderstanding here. And I think that before thinking about materiality, sustainability or not sustainable or circular economy, whatever, we need to rethink our relationship with materiality itself, this dimension, and start trying to understand other materialities. This would be my own opinion, and I would like to hear from you. What do you think about this topic and these new materialities, these two aspects, the aspect of redo our relationship with materiality and the new materialities?
Thank you, Lilyan. Yes, it is indeed a complex discussion, and you can take many different perspectives. I really liked, and I made some notes while you were speaking, I really liked what you said, that we are not materialistic enough, based on your conversation with Kate Fletcher. And it is there are different perspectives. So I'll start indeed with the first one. Yes, I think we need to offer more attention to matter, to materiality, starting from more awareness about how materials are made. Where do these material resources come from? It is living matter indeed. How many hands touched the matter in the process of making it? We are often not aware of that as consumers, for sure. As wearers, often we are not aware of that. And this is why clothing is seen as, well, it's seen as a consumer object. It is, commercialized, it is commodified, we wear it. But I really feel indeed it is so important to develop more knowledge indeed about the matter itself, to re-engage with that matter and to recognize it as matter, to acknowledge it as matter, and to care more for that material dimension. So indeed, like you said, it's kind of a rescue of matter itself. And again, I take a little bit of a philosophical perspective there. I refer to the philosophy of new materialism. For me, that has been very important in trying to understand also the importance of drawing more attention to actual matter. And this also includes the material dimension of the human body, our bodily dimension, living matter as well. We're all living systems. So I completely agree that matter needs to matter more in that sense. At the same time, of course, in the sustainability debate, it is very often focused on new materials, new technologies, new production processes, which is very important. But sometimes I also feel that there needs to be more attention for the social dimension, for the cultural dimension, for the emotional dimension, and the aesthetic dimension of fashion. So in that sense, it's a different...
Recording in progress.
It's a different perspective to take. But in a sense, indeed, there is a lot of focus on materials and new materialities and bio-based materials. But that should go hand in hand with how we engage with matter, how we treat matter, how we wear matter, how we relate to it, how do we communicate when we wear that on the body. So we cannot separate it. Matter and meaning, they go hand in hand. And I guess that's very important. Yeah.
Vão juntos, é verdade.
They go hand in hand, you're right.
Yeah.
That's correct. Danielle, I feel like talking to you, all afternoon long.
That would be lovely, Lilyan. Yes.
Yes.
Another
Quem sabe
time.
um dia.
Yeah.
Quem sabe um dia. Bom, eu estou recebendo já.
I have some questions. We are coming to the Q&A session now. I received 2 questions. Yami is sending me the question. It seems there are two teachers in the fashion system. The first one is how, in your opinion, Danielle, how, as teachers of design, fashion design, can we change the methodology for projects, product creation? This would be one question and is divided into a second question. And how can we educate professionals to the market that can take these new methodologies on to the fashion products? We have ninja questions, very hard to answer. This there.
Thank you. These are wonderful questions. So the first question I understand as how can fashion design change the methods of designing? And yes, this is, I think, a very important, a very crucial question. I see some developments of designers who are already taking into account that embodied approach. For instance, the designer Pauline van Dongen, who I work with from the Netherlands, she developed an approach called embodied design. And there, in that approach, it is very important to start from the lived experience of the wearer. So very often, fashion designers, in my experience, are educated to start from a visual image, an idealized concept that they project onto the model's body. So they have a concept in mind, a visual concept. And then, secondly, they search for a model that fits that image that they want to bring across, or that fits that identity. But that process of embodied design, for instance, is very different. It is really much more focused on how do you experience wearing these materials on the body? How does it make you feel? So it's different. It's moving beyond looking at the body again and starting from how does it make you feel? What does it do to the body? And you can really just ask the wearer, involve the wearer, I think is very important here. How does it make the wearer feel? How does it change the way in which the wearer feels about himself or herself, or communicates or feels? Does it feel empowering or not? So really start again from that embodied experience of the wearer. How does it make the wearer feel? And let that affect the design process. Start from there instead of starting from an idealized visual image. Or indeed, starting from the matter, the material itself. Indeed, as we saw in the example of Diana Scherer with the rhizome, she really just lets the rhizome grow. And she doesn't necessarily know how it will grow beforehand, but just see how it grows and start from the potential of the material itself. I think that's also something very important. Learn how materials grow. How I also gave the example of my colleague Pascal Gatsen. She has the Linen Project in the Netherlands, and she works with students to grow flax. So they work together with a farmer. They work on the field. They grow flax together. They harvest it. They spin the yarns together. So really getting an understanding, developing that tactile understanding also of how do these plants grow? How are yarns being spun? How are textiles actually being made? Where do the materials come from? So yeah, it's starting from the material, it's starting from an embodied approach. I think these are already two suggestions, I guess, that I could give in terms of design methods. And how to educate professionals. The second question, it's for me, it starts with developing an in-depth understanding of how the current system operates, because you really need to start from that understanding first in order to develop ideas about how to do it differently. So start with critical analysis of how the system operates. And this is also what I try to present in my publication, of course, looking at the focus maybe on the individual. It's a very competitive culture in the fashion system. So maybe moving beyond an individual approach, not trying to become the star designer, the next star designer that is successful, but maybe work from a collective, work in an interdisciplinary way. Indeed, work with farmers or work with an ecologist, work with an anthropologist or a sociologist. Try to bring together different disciplines. And also, I think what's very important, we need to look beyond the boundaries of the fashion industry in itself. There's a lot going on in other sectors like the food or agriculture that we can learn from. And so it's really important to open up fashion and to work together in an interdisciplinary way to really learn from each other.
Ótimo.
Yeah.
É isso mesmo.
Wonderful, great, that's it. And it's good when you mention this interdisciplinarity aspect, these crossing topics, and bring these disciplines, anthropology, sociology, social sciences in general, biology, agriculture. 18 years ago, I applied for a master's degree in science, environmental sciences. I went to the interview. I was so nervous, so nervous. And then I remember the first thing that I said in the interview was, we wear natural resources. We wear plants, animals, oil. And this led the board amazed. Yes, you're right, because people did not realize that they were pieces of nature. And I, a designer, in an interview with geographers, anthropologists, biologists, I was so good because I thought that, because I think about it. And then there is a question now connected to what we are talking here. There is a question. Daisy is sending us a question, probably a teacher as well, to me and you both. I hope you answer first. And she's asking about how do we see the role of researchers and educators in this ecosystem of fashion. She brings this term, ecosystem of fashion. And what would be your tip for starters, people that are starting up at universities?
Yes, I think what I try to do as a researcher is we need to do this together. We need to see it as one. I prefer to see it as a learning community, also in education. So it's not about the teacher who knows best and the student who doesn't know. We are in such a new we have faced so many new challenges. So we are in that process of exploration together. We are in that phase of transitioning together. So we are in one learning community, you could say. And that's also the case for research. We are in one learning community together to develop new insights and to develop new knowledge about how to do things differently. And as a researcher myself, I find it very important to bring together many different people from different backgrounds. So I always try to work together with companies, with designers, with other knowledge institutes, for example, other universities, with teachers, students, alumni, people from the industry. I try to bring together as many perspectives as possible to start exploring the challenges and the questions that we have together. And I think this is something in a more traditional academic setting. I worked in a traditional university setting as well, and there the focus is often very much on publishing academic papers and presenting that at conferences, which is also important because you need theory development in order to better understand current developments in culture and society, for instance. But I also feel, personally, I feel a strong responsibility to really develop new knowledge together, to develop new insights together, to develop new practices together, and to let theory and practice inform each other. So I always try to bring together as many people from different backgrounds and perspectives and disciplines as possible in order to explore these issues together. Is that an answer to yes?
Sim.
Yes, you have. Yeah. I hope Daisy gets her answer fine. I will answer my turn to Daisy, what I feel about it. Our reality here, Daisy, is so different from the reality of the other countries, developed countries. There is this big distance between the academia and the market. And we need an action plan. We live in an emergency, climate emergency that is so serious. We live this transformation that is so deep. And I see in our country this distance, this big distance from the academia and the companies, the actions, the suppliers, the producers, and everything operating in the market. In fact, good teams with academic background, anthropology, sociology, biology, whatever science there is, researchers from different areas need to be more present, to be more attentive in the market, because we live in this theory and practice. The practice do not go beyond if you do not reach the producers, if you do not reach the market mechanisms to generate dividends. I believe that we need to work more in this ecosystem of fashion in order to bring in, so we do not have just marketing and branding team speaking. And this is a constant. We see it very frequently in Brazil. And the tip that I have for you, study study different things, have friends in different areas, and read different things, study different perspectives. Because this addition of learning and teaching at the same time, it seems to me that makes the new academia of a third millennium. So we have reached the end of this wonderful conversation. I hope to see you in a new opportunity, Danielle, so we can integrate knowledge and doubts as well, because we have many, many doubts.
I would love to. Thank you so much, Lilyan. It was a wonderful conversation. I really enjoyed it. And thank you for the wonderful questions also from the audience.
Sim. Muito obrigada, Daniela.
Thank you so much, Danielle. See you next time. And thank you so much for your presence. And before, I'd like to thank you for your work. It's so, so important, very important. I would love to see published here in Brazil in Portuguese so people can read it as well, right? I would like to talk to you about it later. It's amazing. Yame, thank you so much. Nina Braga, thank you. I hope you that watched us, this beautiful panel, you drink from this fountain. Kiss to everybody, kisses.